Hello and welcome everyone to the 30-second video in our series of research methodology titled Randomized Controlled Trials. I am absolutely thrilled to be guiding you through this explainer today. You know, whether we're looking at medicine, public health, psychology, education, or economics, we are constantly trying to figure out the exact same thing: cause and effect. How do we actually know if a brand new policy or a cutting-edge treatment really works? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore today by digging into one of the most powerful investigative tools ever designed by researchers. So let's dive right into this.
So think about it for a second. How do we truly know if an intervention works? It seems like a simple question, right? But imagine a patient takes a new medicine and gets better. Did the medicine actually do the heavy lifting, or did the patient just get better naturally over time? In the world of research, it is incredibly difficult to know if an outcome you're looking at is truly caused by your intervention or if it's just due to other background factors. Things like a person's age, their prior ability, or even their socioeconomic conditions. We call these confounding variables, and they can completely muddy the waters. So how do we solve this universal problem? We bring in the ultimate detective tool, the Randomized Controlled Trial, or RCT for short.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to break down this somewhat complex academic framework into a structured, really easy-to-digest blueprint. We'll start with the gold standard explained, trace the roots of the RCT, dissect the key features, walk through the 6 steps to success, weigh the strengths and limitations, and finally look at ethics and real-world impact.
Okay, Section 1, the gold standard explained, demystifying the RCT. We hear this term gold standard thrown around all the time in evidence-based medicine and public health, but what does that actually mean when we get down to the nuts and bolts of research design?
Let's start by breaking down the very name of the methodology. An RCT is a research design where eligible participants are assigned to 2 or more groups. The word randomized literally refers to the random allocation of these participants, and the word control means we're using a very strict comparison group. To make this super concrete, let's imagine an educational study. Say you're testing whether a completely new science teaching method improves student test scores. First, you take a pool of eligible students and randomly assign them into 2 distinct groups. The experimental group gets the exciting new teaching method. The control group, they just get the usual traditional lecture method. After a set period of time, both groups sit down and take the exact same test. If your experimental group scores significantly higher and you've controlled all your other conditions properly, you can confidently say, hey, this new method was effective. You haven't just observed a random change, you've successfully isolated cause and effect.
Moving on to Section 2, roots of the RCT, the historical journey. Where did this incredibly rigorous scientific tool actually come from? To understand why it's so credible, we need a quick look at its history.
Believe it or not, the modern RCT didn't start in a pristine laboratory, it actually started in a field, literally. Back in 1935, a researcher named Ronald A. Fisher was conducting experiments in agriculture. His work in crop yields contributed massively to the foundational principles of randomization, replication, and control. Then, a huge milestone happened in 1948. The focus shifted from crops to human lives. The British Medical Research Council ran a trial on streptomycin as a treatment for pulmonary tuberculosis. This was a landmark moment. They used random allocation and systematic comparison, proving the undeniable life-saving value of randomization in medicine. So, from the muddy fields of 1930s agriculture to mid-century TB wards, this methodology blossomed into the cross-disciplinary gold standard we rely on today in economics, criminology, and beyond.
This brings us to Fisher's foundational and, quite frankly, brilliant insight. Randomization helps remove systematic bias and provides a basis for valid statistical inference. Fisher argued that relying on chance, randomization, is, paradoxically, the most systematic way to remove bias. By leaving the assignment of participants purely up to the roll of the dice, we create this stable, unbiased foundation that allows us to draw highly valid statistical conclusions.
Section 3, Key Features of RCTs, Anatomy of the Investigation. Let's really dissect the non-negotiable features that make an RCT function properly. First up, we have the dual engine of the RCT, the experimental group versus the control group. In the experimental group, the researcher manipulates the independent variable, which is just a fancy way of saying they actively introduce the new intervention. In medicine, that might be a brand new blood pressure drug. In education, it could be an innovative reading program. But to know if that intervention actually works, you absolutely must have a baseline for comparison. That's your control group. Without it, how do you know if a change wasn't just natural maturation over time? The control group gets a placebo, standard care, or the traditional teaching method. As researchers Campbell and Stanley have emphasized, this direct comparison is strictly necessary for distinguishing actual treatment effects from all the other possible explanations out there. Now, here's the kicker. How do we put people into those two groups? Random assignment is without a doubt the single most important feature of an RCT. Note that I'm saying random assignment, not just random selection. It means participants are put into their groups purely by chance, using things like computer-generated sequences, and absolutely never by choice, convenience, or a researcher's gut feeling. Why is it such a big deal? Because it evenly distributes both known and unknown confounding variables. Think about our teaching method study. Students' individual intelligence, their home life, their motivation, all of that impacts their scores. If you randomly assign them, all those countless characteristics get distributed relatively evenly across both groups, giving you a perfectly comparable baseline. Researchers Shadish, Cook, and Campbell point out that this is literally one of the strongest methods science has for reducing selection bias. Another absolutely vital feature is blinding. Human expectations are powerful, and they can heavily skew data. If a patient knows they're getting a cutting-edge new treatment, they might report feeling better simply because they expect to feel better. To stop this, researchers use blinding. In a single-blind trial, participants don't know which group they are in. In a double-blind trial, neither the participants nor the researchers directly interacting with them know. According to Schultz and Grimes, this keeps everyone in the dark and vastly reduces performance and ascertainment bias. Now, sure, this is tough to pull off in education. A teacher usually knows what method they're teaching, but it's an absolute staple in medical and psychological research. Finally, for the anatomy of this investigation to hold together, we need standardized procedures. This means ensuring that absolutely all groups are treated exactly the same, with the sole exception of that specific intervention being tested. You have to use the exact same instructions, the exact same timeframes, identical testing conditions, and identical measurement tools. If a researcher gives one group an extra 10 minutes on a test or puts them in a slightly quieter room, the validity of the whole study is fundamentally compromised. Strict standardization is what lets us isolate the true, unadulterated effect of the intervention.
Section 4, 6 Steps to Success, the RCT Blueprint. Let's transition from the anatomy of the tool to how an investigator actually wields it in the real world.
Here are the 6 sequential steps to pull this off successfully. Step 1. Define a clear, measurable problem and formulate your hypothesis. You can't just vaguely say, I want to improve education. As Creswell and Creswell note, you have to be precise. What is the effect of cooperative learning on math achievement for grade IX students? Step 2. Carefully select eligible participants based on strict inclusion and exclusion criteria, and make sure your sample's large enough to actually detect a meaningful difference. Step 3. Randomly allocate those participants into your experimental and control groups. Step 4. Implement the intervention consistently, following a remarkably strict protocol to guarantee standardization. Step 5. Measure the outcomes using highly reliable tools. Poor measurement will ruin an otherwise brilliant design. And finally, Step 6. Analyze the data using appropriate statistics, like t-tests or regression analysis, to see if the experimental group actually showed significantly better results.
Actually, I want to pause and zoom in on step 3 for just a second, because there is a crucial safeguard here called allocation concealment. This means the person actually enrolling the participants into the study must not know in advance which group the next participant will end up in. If a researcher knows the next open spot is in the experimental group, they might consciously or even unconsciously enroll someone they feel will really benefit from it. Allocation concealment stops that bias dead in its tracks and protects the integrity of the whole trial. Section 5. Strengths and limitations, triumphs and traps. As incredible as RCTs are, no research methodology is absolutely perfect. Let's weigh the unmatched analytical power of the RCT against its real-world boundaries.
So, in research, there is this massive tension between internal and external validity. Internal validity is the RCT's superpower. Because of random assignment, control groups, and strict standardization, an RCT provides incredibly strong internal validity, meaning it accurately proves that the intervention caused the outcome. However, the trap waiting for researchers is external validity. This is the extent to which these findings actually generalize to the messy, unpredictable real world. If a study is conducted in a perfectly controlled, highly artificial laboratory environment, the intervention might work wonderfully in there, but fail completely when you roll it out to an ordinary, chaotic classroom or a busy community center.
But make no mistake, internal validity is the ultimate triumph of this design. As Campbell and Stanley reinforce, controlling for all those alternative explanations allows researchers to draw the absolute strongest possible conclusions about cause and effect.
It is exactly why RCTs are so heavily relied upon when governments and organizations have to decide if a billion-dollar medical treatment or a sweeping national policy should actually be adopted. That being said, we've got to be real here and acknowledge the limitations. RCTs are notoriously expensive and incredibly time-consuming to run properly. They require careful monitoring, specialized staff, and repeated painstaking measurements. On top of that, they are notoriously difficult to pull off in natural social settings like schools or hospitals where strict random assignment disrupts everyday routines. You also face a high risk of attrition, meaning participants dropping out over time, which severely weakens your results. And finally, there are some very serious ethical dilemmas to consider. Which brings us to Section 6, Ethics and Real-World Impact, the Human Element. Let's conclude our explainer by looking at the profound responsibilities researchers hold. Because when you're dealing with medical treatments or social policies, real human lives are on the line. The Belmont Report outlines the essential ethical principles researchers must follow when working with human subjects: respect for persons through informed consent, beneficence to maximize benefits and minimize harm, and justice for fair inclusion and exclusion. Now, justice is particularly tricky in RCTs. Think about it. Is it fair to deny a potentially life-saving or highly beneficial intervention to a control group? If a highly effective medical treatment already exists, using a placebo instead of standard care is completely unethical. In fields like education and psychology, researchers often solve this elegantly by using a waitlist control group. This simply means the control group acts as a comparison during the study, but once the study is over, they are also given the beneficial intervention. Ethics always has to be central to the design.
When carefully designed and ethically conducted, the real-world impact of RCTs is absolutely staggering. They provide the very strongest evidence base we have to shape the decisions that govern our modern world. In health, they tell us unequivocally if new vaccines and surgical procedures are safe. In education, they reveal if digital learning software actually boosts performance in real classrooms. In the social sciences, they help evaluate massive poverty reduction schemes. They are, quite simply, the backbone of evidence-based knowledge. So, I'll leave you with this provocative thought. The next time you're scrolling and you see a flashy headline claiming a new diet works miracles or a new social policy is guaranteed to succeed, ask yourself, was it tested against the gold standard? Were those confounding variables actively controlled? Was there strict random assignment? Apply this powerful investigative framework to the claims you encounter in your everyday life, and you will start seeing the world like a true researcher. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this breakdown helpful and fascinating, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss out on our future content. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.